It's my great pleasure to welcome everybody tonight. In fact, it's great that you're here, given that we locked most of you out for the early part of the evening and made it difficult for everybody else. So thank you for coming. I'll begin by acknowledging that we are here today on the traditional land of the Aboriginal people, and I will pay my respects to the Aurora people that are the traditional custodians of this land. I would also like to pay my respects to the elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are present here today. A special welcome is to our panel, Oliver Kratzer, National President, Design Institute of Australia and Managing Director of Ideal Industrial, Mark Armstrong, Blue Sky Creative and Adjunct Professor at Monash University, Brandon Guillen, Good Design Australia, President-elect of ICSID, the International Council for the Society of Industrial Design, and Professor Sam Buccolo from the Queensland University of Technology, a really terrific panel of leaders in this discipline. I also would like to welcome Penelope Seidler from the Built Environment Advisory Council and fellow colleagues from our faculty, other faculties, other universities, and industry, as well as students. So welcome to this 5th Utzon lecture. Breaking news for the university is that the University of New South Wales announced on June 7th, 2012, was given the Top Innovator Award. I'll read from the citation. UNSW has been named as Australia's most innovative university, winning the higher education category of the Thomson Reuters Citation and Innovation Awards 2012. All academic institutions and enterprises in Australia were considered for the awards. Criteria used to assess the level of innovation included size of patent portfolio, success rate, extent of globalization, and influence of the innovations. The patent analysis was based on Thomson Reuters data. This Innovation Award, our Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research, Professor Les Fields, said that this Innovation Award reaffirms UNSW's position as the leading university for industry to engage with. He goes on to say, we have an excellent track record in developing world-class technologies that provide real solutions and applications for real-world problems. I might add that UNSW leads Australia in the high-level Australian Research Council linkage grants designed to integrate research with industry and the professions, so it's compatible. In 2011, UNSW became the first university in Australia and one of the first in the world to offer the majority of its intellectual property to companies for free. Easy access IP simplifies the process for university research to be put to use by society and the economy. And this was acknowledged by Dr. Kevin Cullen, the CEO of New South Wales Innovations and the Commercialisation and Knowledge Exchange Company of the University of New South Wales. One example is the photovoltaics area, where our innovations have been effectively the gold medal winners over the last 30 to 40 years. We just lead the world. And it has an enormous global as well as national impact. And there are others as well, such as our Smart Centre, which has replaced coal and coke with recycled tyres and plastic bottles to fuel the making of steel. So this is tonight about those sorts of things, and this is the place to be hearing about them, and this is the panel that I think will give us an extraordinary experience about the world of industrial design. In the last 4 lectures, we've had Professor Michael Newman on urban design, Hiroshi Sambuichi, one of Japan's most awarded architects in recent years on architecture, former, I think, well, definitely High Court judge, I think head of the High Court, Sir Anthony Mason, on the legal aspects of building practice, and Professor James Warwick, most recently, on an in-depth analysis of Canberra and its planning and design history. I might say that Professor Warwick was followed by a whole lot of media, particularly coming out of Canberra, about his strident criticism of what's happened. So tonight continues that tradition and has a lecture titled The Future of Industrial Design, and our expert panel will explore this future around three interdependent themes: strategic design, crowdsourcing, and manufacturing 2.0, if that's right. Now, that'll be interesting. I don't know what that quite means. I now would like to introduce the Program Director for Industrial Design in our faculty, Dr. Miles Park. It's a program that has made many successful careers. Some of you are here tonight, and many of our students have won international awards. It's a terrific program, and a great credit to Miles and his team who deliver it. Miles has worked in Australia and the UK in numerous design practices and also in research settings during the past 20 years. His research interests include product obsolescence, e-waste, energy efficiency, rebound effects, and technology platforms for innovations. Miles will particularly have the pleasure of launching the Industrial Design Educators Network Journal, and will introduce the speakers for tonight's panel discussion. Welcome to Miles.
Thank you, Alec, and welcome everyone. I'll be brief, but it's a great opportunity for me to have a moment of tonight to announce the launch of the Industrial Design Educators Network, the IDEN Journal. And we have the first issue here, hot off the press, and we call this our prototype issue. And indeed, I'd like to also introduce to you Berto Pandolfo, who's in the audience from UTS. Berto and I co-edited this first issue, and indeed we've got one or two of the authors here tonight as well. So that's a terrific that they could make it along, and we're very pleased that we've finally got this issue up. Now, the Industrial Design Educators Network has been an informal grouping of industrial design program directors from a number of institutions across Australia. And it first met in 2005 in Canberra and has met at other times, once here, I think was 2007, and probably in 2009 over at UTS. So it hopes to be the voice for industrial design education in the region. We hope, as well as Australia and New Zealand, that it becomes wider and more inclusive of our wider region. And we hope that the journal, as we perceive it, fills a niche which sits between the academic journals and the more trade consumer-oriented journals. Because we find that with a lot of the academic journals, they don't connect often with what's happening in practice. The practitioners often aren't involved or readily engaged with that material. And likewise, a lot of the commercially orientated press quite often has a very strong market consumer focus, so often doesn't tell the story of the design process or the organisational aspects, which are so interesting for us as designers to know how successful products come to fruition. So we hope it is an attempt to, well, we believe it's an attempt to start to bridge that divide. The first issue exists as a physical publication, but part of this idea of being the prototype issue is that we hope to explore new ways to disseminate it. So it exists now through our website, www.idenjournal.com, as a PDF, downloadable PDF. But we'd like to explore in the future other ways, other emerging electronic platforms. As I might add, that Fairfax and News Limited are currently scratching their heads about in terms of the future of publishing. So it's an interesting time to read in terms of how a journal or indeed the bigger picture in terms of the media connect and disseminate their product. So I will now hand over to Oliver Kratzner, who will chair tonight's panel, and he in turn will introduce our panel guests in more detail. So over to you, Oliver.
Thank you very much, Miles. Thank you, Professor Sanders. It's an honour and a pleasure to be participating in this very prestigious lecture series. It works. Hello and good evening. My name is Till Oliver Kratzer, and I will convene tonight's panel discussion. I'm an industrial designer. I have a small industrial design consultancy in Sydney's Surrey Hills. I'm also National President of the Design Institute of Australia. The DIA is Australia's peak professional membership body, representing interior designers and industrial designers, design managers and design educators. We are a not-for-profit organisation that was founded more than 60 years ago. Our work encompasses professional development, government lobbying, publication of practice notes, compilation of industry information, and much, much more. And on the information side of things, I'm proud to announce that we've just launched the results of our latest fee and salary survey. And the best thing about that is, even though designers generally have trailed the AWOLD salary average, industrial designers seem to be ahead of all the other disciplines there. Not me, I can assure you, but at least we have a hope. Industrial design has always prided itself as being a very hands-on profession, but we can't be real professional bodies without a body of original academic work. And we have witnessed here tonight, in the form of the launch of the Industrial Design Educator Network's journal, an important step in underpinning industrial design's intellectual and academic foundation. There is movement towards collaboration among a number of organisations at different levels, from the Australian Design Alliance locally to global bodies like the International Design Alliance. And I'd like to congratulate both Miles Park and Berto Pandolfo, his counterpart at the competing institution, for their hard work and very bipartisan leadership in this sector. Naturally, I was in trouble before the presentation started because I cheekily referred to ideal industrial as the bastard child of the Industrial Revolution. That was meant in the Australian sense of the word, tongue firmly planted in cheek, implying adaptability, smarts, and nimbleness. To put tonight's panel discussion into a bit of context for you, it's a modern profession that's not widely recognised. And I wish I had $1 for every time people say, oh, do you design factories? Industrial design's traditional client base, designing for local manufacturers, is being eroded by many factors. China is screaming up the value chain, from sweatshop to basic manufacturing to the most sophisticated high-level production integration. In the last 30 years, China has profoundly transformed itself at a velocity that shows no signs of abating and which is in stark contrast to our own relative stagnation. It's not all doom and gloom, though. Even though shrinking in demand, as long as people need toasters, chairs and trains, there will always be a need for traditional industrial design. Tonight's 3 topics were chosen because they're relevant right now, and they are in our consciousness already. In other words, we don't have to spend a lot of time defining or explaining them, but they're still very much in flux and liable to massive change. The growth opportunities for our profession lie away from conventional products, away from atoms, away from objects. Like all good design, what you leave out is just as important as what you put in. So the things I'm not going to discuss tonight, we don't want to get into tonight too much, are on the board above you. Each topic that we're going to discuss is big and complex enough to warrant its own event. And there could also have been so many more topics. Topics such as design for social impact, service design, process design, business model design, user interface design, experiential design, public sector design, everything to do with sustainability, and many, many more. The other reason for the final choice of topics, of course, was I was very fortunate to be able to assemble quite a stellar panel. A panel that is not just heavy duty by Australian standards, but brings together 3 individuals that are players on the world stage. Our first panellist, who we'll ask onto the stage as soon as I finish his bio, is Mr. Mark Armstrong of Blue Sky Design, who will forever be known for his design of the Sydney Olympic torch. He has an enviable Australian international client list that includes ResMed, Qantas, Cochlear and EDI Rail. Mark is here as Mark is still one of Australia's most highly awarded, acclaimed and successful industrial design practitioners who has seen many changes affect the profession and has managed to adapt, thrive and grow at every turn. His brief tonight is to share and interpret it from that perspective of this seasoned practitioner. You don't look a day over 20. Brandon Geen is known to all of us as the head of Good Design Australia, purveyor of the Australian International Design Awards. He is also the president-elect of Industrial Design's peak global body, the International Council of Societies of Industrial Designers, or ICSID. Brandon is going to provide a global oversight and interpret our position on the global stage tonight. And I missed your photo there, I'm terribly sorry. Our final panelist is Professor Dr. Sam Buckalow, one of the smartest, best connected and down-to-earth people I've ever met. Sam works with companies Australia, Europe and America on high-level strategic design and business initiatives. His areas of expertise include design-led innovation, business transformation, radical innovation, disruptive innovation and design strategy. I look forward to Sam's unique input for and from a business and strategic perspective. I will be convening this panel. Although the topics may overlap, I will try to keep the conversation on track. Tonight is an opportunity to perform a deep dive into these issues with a handful of experts who will try to illuminate them from their unique perspectives. But do not expect to leave here tonight with a how-to manual, a checklist, or simple answers to complex issues. If you have a question, please write it down on the cards that were handed out at the door in clearly legible writing, and don't forget to put your name on top. We will collect the cards after the panel discussion and will address the most pertinent ones in a Q&A session. So, and this brings us to tonight's first topic of strategic design. So, if you'll join me, please, gentlemen. We're all switched on. Check, cash and code. Wonderful. Our first topic tonight, strategic design. You can see the blurb up there. Sam, as the world expert of strategic design, tell us, what is strategic design?
Strategic design is just a subset of industrial design, really. It takes where our core understanding of design processes and it applies it to business thinking. So here you have a business who actually wants to strategically enter the market in a new way. It's looking at its actual positioning, it's actually looking at its competitive advantage, it's actually looking at its capability. So as industrial designers used to look at manufacturing in terms of constraints, in terms of actually the way it actually understood materials, processes, consumers, designers now strategically look at businesses exactly the same way, as a set of constraints. So it actually strategically looks at what are the actual capabilities of this firm, what are the activities it does, where it is entering as a market, and how do you best configure this opportunity of this business to actually address this market. So it's really designing a business. And with that, it's actually designing products and services that actually really underpin the actual business activity or the business value. So at one level, it's exactly what designers have been doing for many, many years. It's just looking at it from a very different abstract view of actually what our constraints are. No longer are they, as Oliver said, atoms. They're actually now about resources, they're about capability, it's about leadership, it's about culture, it's about value propositions.
Thank you. I was at a talk recently in New Zealand, and there was a very successful CEO from an American company there, and he went, "Oh, design, yes, that's a sound only dogs can hear." Is there a change in senior management about design and the role of design? Mark, maybe.
Well, you like to think that all larger organisations get it now. You know, everybody's seen the Apple model, you know, BMW, embedded design thinking in the organisation. It's hard to believe, isn't it, that companies are out there that don't actually embed design thinking in everything they do. They have the back room where they might have an industrial designer if you're lucky, or they use some consultants, but design isn't embedded into their process. It isn't part of their daily work. And that's one of the things that's still lacking in the Australian industrial scene, particularly in the small to medium-sized businesses. Larger businesses, they get it. They've developed a strategy. They've got senior industrial designers in the team. They're design-led. But still, lots completely miss it. And one of the great opportunities we have in Australia is to embed design in our small to medium-sized companies so that everything they do is, you know, based on those principles of understanding the end user, doing proper research, doing, I guess, let's say, developing a strategy and making sure everybody in the organisation sings the same tune. You know, you'd be amazed at how many companies I meet in the course of my day where the left hand literally doesn't know what the right hand's doing. If you ask anybody, what's the company's vision? Well, Well, a guy on the sales counter will say one thing, the CEO will say, he wants to quad the turnover or something like that. Everybody has a different view. However, can you drive a successful organisation unless it's harmonised and strategic and aimed in the one direction? And design thinking does that.
Design thinking is one of those very scary terms, though. 97%, I believe, of Australian companies are SMEs. Like I said, the big companies get it. We've seen Commonwealth Bank recently has really cleaned up its act. Telstra is starting to get very friendly-ish. How can we drive this design awareness into small business? And I take your point. You sit there with a client, and they pull out their new iPhone. They go, "Isn't this fantastic?" And you say, "You could do that too." And they go, "No." From when you sit down with your clients, how do you convince an SME?
Well, just one thing there. I guess they aim too low. They aim way too low. They think, well, we should be playing this space. Let's say whatever their field is, if it's medical or if it's transport, they want to play in that space. They never aim to own the space. And you can find lots of little companies, great case studies where a small company in Sweden or in New Zealand, and they make unique little things, but they are the masters of it. They own everything about it. They have a deep knowledge on that subject, and they own it. But if you go to an Australian company, lots of them say, well, look, we want to compete in the Australian market. But to compete in the Australian market, you have to be a global player because everybody's going to come to us. One way or the other, everybody has to play in the global field. And long we've thought, well, it's okay, we're isolated. Let's just work in the New South Wales market, for example. But until they start thinking globally, that's when you start to get this next level where they can really export, grow their businesses and, theoretically cube the turnover. That's the great objective.
So I believe traditionally companies that do well in export markets are the ones that do very, very well domestically.
But I think, just on that point, I think, how do we get SMEs to start thinking this way? I don't think they have a choice anymore. Over the last probably 3 to 5 years, Australia's become a high-cost environment. Our dollars, as you all know, has skyrocketed, and our productivity has declined significantly. Because of that, we have to actually enter markets very differently. We are moving from a commodity producers to actually solving problems. And that's where most of our SMEs are very good at. They know how to solve a problem. Give us a problem, and our design community can solve it. They can generally solve any problem they actually put their mind to. But as we move into this high-cost environment, low productivity, we can no longer compete that way. We're just unsustainable as a business or as a community. So I don't think they get a choice anymore. And we see a lot of actual businesses just falling off that radar. But those who are taking that leadership, who want to grow, and it's not just growing bottom line, it's growing that top line, and actually really wanting to take, as we're saying, about owning this space, they're the ones who are starting to see real growth in their business. And we're not talking just 5% growth, we're talking 30, 40% growth. And they're the ones who are actually employing people and actually saying, well, we can take on the world with our capability.
If only all our clients were like that. Brandon, internationally, I mean, Australia's got no excuse anymore. We are an aeroplane flight away from anywhere in the world, which is as expensive as anywhere in the world, as we heard. I think Goran Rus put that thought out there. When you go around the world, and we talk about the classic, we talk about Finland, we talk about Sweden, looking at it globally, where does, and I hate to say this, I don't want to sound parochial, where does Australia sit in the great scheme of things?
It's an interesting question. I think we're fortunate that the perception of Australia from the rest of the world is that we are fantastic at design and we do very well and we've got a fantastic industry and that our business sector here understands design. We know that that's probably not the reality, unfortunately. It's a difficult question to answer. I would like to say that we're positioned quite well internationally. But I think, if you compare ourselves to countries in Europe, particularly in the Scandinavian area, we're so far behind. We really are, and I think that's unfortunate. In terms of business understanding what design can actually offer and the value that it actually has, we're very far behind.
Bugger. So it's better news. Again, a near neighbour of ours across the Dutch. New Zealand, absolutely phenomenally proactive in that space. I think 11 years ago they started the design integration program over there. I think both Mark and Sam, you're both involved with their local equivalents here. And this is something, do you want to tell us about that? Mark?
Yeah. Well, the New South Wales government has taken on a pilot, which is called the Design Integration Program. And this pilot has been adopted from the New Zealand model, which I believe came from the UK originally, wasn't it, Sam? So it's about governments putting together an audit team, specialists in the field of design and strategy, and they select companies that they consider to be prescient. And those companies that are on the verge of greatness, can be an exporter, have the definite criteria that's going to employ lots of people. So their potential, they identify those companies, and then once that selection is made, the integration program is all about explaining the power of design. And it's not about changing the company, it's just about embedding design processes in everything they do. But in order to do that, it isn't just building a room out the back where you put some industrial designers. First, you have to understand the culture of the company, its values, its purpose, its strategy. And that's why strategic design is more than just industrial design. It's all about these other values. And there's quite a lot of analysis. We collate a lot of data about the company. We look at their competitors. We understand the way they compete at the moment. For example, lots of companies compete on price. And this is all about competing on difference. You don't want to fight that price war. That's a losing battle in Australia. The thing is to have that expertise, that differentiation. And so the design integration team then go through and do a full audit on the company. And in the team, there's an industrial designer. I'm the industrial designer in our team. There's a business strategist and an analyst. And we look at the finances of the company, the personnel, the resources, and then we write a report. And the report is, sometimes it's a difficult pill to swallow because you tell somebody about their weaknesses, we do a SWOT, and you tell them their strengths. And at the end of it, what we do is we identify opportunities for them. And every case that I've been involved now, the opportunities are glaring and they're fantastic. So what you think the company's going to be a bit disappointed at when you give them a scorecard of 2 out of 10, where they are today. But the good news is, you know, we can double your turnover in the next 5 years. There's great potential. There's markets you can expand on and to export. And suddenly the CEO's eyes just light up. You know, when you talk those sort of dollars, he's very interested. And then it's a matter of then mentoring the firm. Because one thing is to pass judgment, analyse them and tell them what to do. Within a very short time, they lose their way. Something else happens, CEO passes on or whatever, and the thing implodes. But by the way the government set it up is they have a mentor, and the mentor guides them, each checks point, to say, okay, which branding agency are you going to appoint? What industrial designers are going to give you support? Where's the market opportunities? Have you done the research? Where are the prototypes? All the sorts of industrial design 101 things, but they become empowerment. So it's I'm raving about it. I think it's just a fantastic thing.
Are industrial designers up to that? Is current industrial design training? ...
No, I have to say no. It's one of the biggest struggles we find. So in Queensland, we run a very similar program. We've just finished 12 companies working through this program, I believe. And I've been lucky enough to mentor 5 of them. And as a mentor, you don't do design work. You know, it's actually a full, proper mentoring session. And I think the greatest honour I ever got from one of the CEOs was saying, "You're not my mentor, you're my tormentor." Because I kept them honest. This notion of actually, how do you engage? And so this is the CEO group. These 5 companies, we form a group, essentially their own social capital. And the biggest challenge they face is, who do we turn to? Who in the design community now can actually work with us to actually take these ideas further? And you still get designers who work with these firms who have gone through this design integration program and tell these firms, no, you still don't know who your customer is. We know who your customer is. I'm the expert in this. And like these firms are saying, no, we've just gone through this great model and we've actually been empowered to actually better understand who we are. We've actually realigned our resources. We've got new HR. And you're now telling us we don't know? Now, that's a bit of arrogance, I believe, coming through in the design community.
the other thing...
Accusing the design community of arrogance.
The other thing that I think is interesting, which was an eye-opener for me, is that at Blue Sky, I'm an industrial design consultant, so typically I take a design brief from a client. We do it, don't we? Mm-hmm. We send a quote in, we do the deliverable according to the quote, and then we send an invoice and run away. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't empower or strengthen the company. It sort of makes them beholden to you in a way. So, you know, you hope that in 2 years or 3 years when they need to go again, they call you up because they haven't learned anything from the process. All you did was gave them the piece of cake that they needed at the time, and now they're hungry again. And that's been the business model for industrial design consulting in Australia. And that's flawed. So it doesn't help the industry. It's not right for the industrial designers either. It doesn't grow the cake. A much better model is to teach, pass on the learnings, understand the design, encourage them to hire industrial designers to support the creative input. And what happens is then the company grows much quicker, and that'll give more industrial design work, not less. That's my view. For me, that was sort of such an eye-opening thing, and it's changed the way Blue Sky deals with clients. We've completely rethought that, you know, do the job, send the invoice. We're trying now to pass on knowledge, explain what we've done, interact more with them, encourage them to hire their own industrial designers that we can work with. In the old days, I always considered that to be a threat. Oh, you know, they've hired somebody. Drats, you know. But these days, I think of it in different terms.
These are quite radical words, I think, overall. To tidy up the strategic sector, when are we going to see designers in the boardroom? Brandon, when do you think that'll happen? We've got accountants, we've got lawyers, lots of those, the odd engineer, especially in Germany. When are we going to see industrial designers there?
Well, you changed the question because you said when are we going to see designers or when are we going to see industrial designers, and I think that in itself is interesting. But I personally have a problem with this not design strategy, but design thinking in a way. I think it's a word that is bandied around a lot, and particularly at the executive level where you see companies now saying, oh, if we engage in design thinking, it's going to solve all our problems. But I think they run the risk of actually skimming over the design process and actually perhaps not even understanding what the design process is. A crash course in design thinking, and all their executives, you know, overnight learn how to think like designers. So there's a little bit of a risk in that. To answer your question about whether industrial designers or designers per se are going to be able to sit at the boardroom table, I think it's what Mark was saying. When the language starts to change less about design's probably not even mentioned, but when you start talking about bottom line, and you start talking about profit, and you start talking about competitiveness, and the designer actually starts to have much more of an understanding of the business and the business model, and how design is actually going to impact the business and make it more competitive. Then all of a sudden the CEO and the CFO and everybody else around the board starts to go, okay, maybe these guys are not the people who just choose what colour the product should be or what shape it should be, but actually are involved in the actual business itself.
So what I'm reading here is a general upskilling of the industrial design profession. So we learn to speak the language of money, of business, industry and strategy.
To some extent, but I think I'd reframe the question by saying it's design capability in the boardroom. And I think that's what we actually need to start seeing. And once you get design capability at that level, I think the design community will actually flourish, because then you can actually start to actually have an equal footing in the business.
It also, I mean, we can never do a presentation or a talk without referring to Apple, but it's got to come from the top down. So you've got to have a CEO who absolutely understands design, embraces it, is the champion of design, and you know, in someone like Steve Jobs, that was clearly the case. So I believe that with the programs, the Ulysses program and the program now that's running in New South Wales, it is focused on the CEO, and it's about having the buy-in at the CEO level. And I think if you don't go at, you know, if you don't aim at that level, then it's almost going to be parked in a little side department somewhere.
That's exactly what we don't want. And we do want to run the world, after all, because we do know what is good. Because we do think about people. I think that's why we're different to engineers and accountants, bless them. Look, that is our time, unfortunately, for the strategic part, but we're going to go straight into the next topic. And there is overlap here, so I'm confident that we'll keep rolling along here. And with crowdsourcing being the next opportunity. Manufacturing, the next opportunity. Manufacturing 2.0 has been a long time coming. It's the mass customization that we were promised maybe 10 years ago. Mark, as someone who designs a lot of things that people make a lot of, are you seeing, not just in aerospace and really high-level areas, but in everyday consumer products, are you seeing a change there?
Look, there's definitely a strong trend towards bespoke, designing for the individual. And this is the technology that enables that. I think industrial designers and all manufacturers suffer this massive capital investment for tooling. To make a product, you have this big investment, cut a piece of steel and all of the money involved, and then you make the first product. The great thing about this is it's spontaneous. Anybody can make it. You've got a CAD file, you can make something, you can email it, it comes back to you as a part in steel, in plastic, in rubber. So this gives freedom. It's amazing freedom to everybody. Car companies are talking about bespoke seats, that you buy the car at the same time you get your back scanned and, all these sorts of things that can make products absolutely perfect for you. So, and the technology to make them is becoming household. It won't be long in my time where you would sit at home in front of your 3D printer, say what you'd like. Let's say you want a vase for the hall table, and you would download that file and print it in your garage, or let's say on your desk, and put the vase there. You pay just like you would download a song, you'll download the object. And I think that's coming. The only thing with tools like this is it's the equivalent of a Stradivarius, right? But you can give that to a monkey and it's never going to play a beautiful tune. So it doesn't belittle the design talents, the proportions, the skill needed. It just enables people to make stuff quick. I love it.
But I mean, there's a law of unintended consequences with that. For example, 70% of overnight courier deliveries are spare parts. So when your local home dealer can print his own spare parts, you're going to see an industry decimated there. And the other thing, and I said specifically, we didn't want to talk about intellectual property tonight because that's a topic that's going to take us for the next 4 weeks possibly. When I have a design, I upload it on the Shapeways website, anybody can download it, and some of these websites now allow you to modify designs. So you can have a vase, and the designer can specify criteria. You can make it bigger, longer, wider, a different colour, and you can download it, and the designer gets a fee, and Shapeways, of course, takes their cut. But where does it end when these designs keep going and going and going? They're your babies. You've opened up Pandora's box. Where is this going to lead in terms of real design and intellectual property? Not intellectual property, just real design. Somebody pick that up.
Well, I'll go. I'm getting noisy here. But the thing about it, real design, is that it's considered, it's careful, it's process-driven, it takes talent to make something beautiful. And that's an attribute, right?
But people don't care about that. We saw what happened to graphic design when PostScript printers came out and everybody had an Apple Mac and they copied Mac Paint and they called themselves a graphic designer. And the over level of graphic design went to the toilet around the country, frankly, around the world, and only slowly we're seeing it pick up, because most people don't discriminate that much. I mean, Brandon, you run design awards. You're very much about discriminating about really excellent design from mediocre design. How can we maintain the high level of design and not go through the same dump in 3D printing, for example?
I have to admit, I really can't get my head around the whole 3D printing thing, and I think it's going to take the industry by storm, if that's a bold enough comment. But if you compare it to the graphic design industry, everyone's a designer. Everyone can cut hair, but you're going to go to a proper hairdresser to get your hair professionally cut. So I'm hoping, I think there's
the plot, so.
Probably not you, Oliver. Bad analogy, right. Actually, a bad analogy all around here. Let me think of something else. There's an optimistic side of me that perhaps looks at this whole space and and I guess as it evolves, I'm hoping we'll put much more emphasis on the professional side of design. Because everyone can design anything, and you can download files, and you can print anything, and you can modify designs, as you say. But hopefully, it does put more emphasis on the professional side of what industrial design does. So,
look, and this is a good segue into our next topic, which is crowdsourcing, where, again, everybody's a designer suddenly. And I was scared recently, again, there was Tim Brown at the conference, and he gave this fantastic quote, and it scared the bejesus out of me. He said, design used to be done 2 people, then it was done 4 people, then it's done with people, and now it's done by people. And there was uproar around the room, and the compromise that was reached was, well, the designer still gets to hold the pencil. I don't know about you, but 4 years of uni, 20 years of experience, and you're a pencil holder, surely there are other ways of we can interpret this new direction of both crowdsourcing designs as well as manufacturing 2.0, 2 topics that are very, very closely interwoven.
But I also believe it's actually linked back to strategic design, because what manufacturing 2.0 does, and let's not kid ourselves, it is a niche market, I still believe. If you go into high value add products where there's regulatory environments that you can't just make subtle changes to certain products, and you can give obviously constraints around certain things, and I know that potentially will change. But what it allows you to do as a manufacturer or a producer is to fail fast. You can put ideas out there very quickly, which then comes back to this crowdsourcing and allows you to co-design. And this is where I think designers have a real opportunity. So they're not actually holding pens, they're actually capturing this knowledge as they go out there with that. But these are the capabilities in these firms that we actually need. So we've got this enabler of this technology to allow us to put ideas out there very, very quickly, to fail with those ideas, but to work with our customers or stakeholders and actually build up this knowledge so we actually have this real competitive advantage.
So it's very much a strategic direction approach we have to take to this. But I don't agree with you on the point that it's going to be a while. The technology is changing so fast. I researched this topic 6 months ago at the start of this, and the amount of products that have come on the market in the meantime, and we've seen some fantastic interruption from 3D Systems and some of the really big players who've brought out low-end, not high-end, low-end systems. And that's the real, if you're an expert on disruptive systems, that's the way of the future. I think the position we're in with manufacturing 2.0 now is that we used to be before PCs came around. You had the IBMs, you had the big databases and all that, but we're about to see this incredible change. And there's a great quote I heard, which is we always overestimate the short-term impact of technology, but underestimate the long-term impact. And I firmly believe that this local, small-scale production manufacturing 2.0, without tools, without capital investment, I think from a professional perspective, we can iterate very, very quickly, and we can get product out there and test even small production runs, 50, hundreds, thousands. But I believe in 10, 15 years, we are going to be scratching our heads in terms of how far it's come. And do you want to predict, if you wanted to leapfrog 3 generations of technology, and predicting the future is always a deadly exercise, but I'm happy for you guys to have a go at that.
over to you.
I genuinely like 3 generations ahead. Not it's good for industrial designers, we run small-scale production. We're talking about 15 years into the future. Take a punt, have a stab at the most crazy idea where the cost of manufacture has come right down.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned before, I think it's that the freedom it gives manufacturers to concentrate on what the customer wants, what's right for the end user. It's an empowerment, and I think that's the thing that will delight manufacturers or customers and designers. It's a way of empowering, getting the right product to the right individual. It's just right for them. It's a perfect scenario. So I think that's probably what will happen in that space. I don't see the crowdsourcing thing as a threat. In the note there, you mentioned that low-end design will be sort of killed because people will go online to try and get their products designed. But there will be some things. But you could get a bath plug done online, I imagine, and maybe some other things. But if you wanted complex medical equipment or transport, and you need analysis and you need strategy and in-depth research to come with conclusions, you just can't send that up to a bunch of blokes online and say, have a crack at this. So it's not going to be a threat in pure terms to the profession.
I agree. I think it's if you sort of look at a crystal ball and say in 5 and 10 years' time, yes, this technology is going to evolve. These major multinational companies that are leaders in their field are also going to evolve. And they were also going to start developing amazing technology and amazing products alongside that technology as it evolves itself. So I agree with Mark. They're not going to stand still and just wait for this technology to overtake them.
But you do have websites like 99 Designs, for example, where you can put a proposal up there. I need a business card letterhead designed, and people pitch for it from all over the world, and you can get a full letterhead and identity done, quality varying, but people have portfolios for $200, for example. That's sort of the bottom end. And as we all know, historically since World War II, everyone's screaming up the value chain these days because that's where the money and the impact is, frankly. So you're confident the profession will stay ahead of the game and evolve with it?
Yeah, because there's just too much to design. It's much more sophisticated than that. And so it's never going to be a threat. It's going to be fine if you want a logo, if you've got a service station or you've got a little business like that, sure, why not? But if you're running an organisation and you need a strategic vision for what your logo should be and how to express that in a powerful way to link with your customers, the chance of getting it online are slim. I mean, you can do it for fun, but it's less likely to be investigative than...
And I guess that's the point I was trying to make, is that the optimistic side of me would say that it would just push the value of professional design further up the chain, and that you would have this almost design as a commodity where, you know, everyone is a designer, and if you want that level of design, we'll go out there and you know, pay $200 and that's what you'll get. But if
is there the possibility of an alternative business model? You've got companies like Procter & Gamble with their program, which is called Connect and Develop, I believe, which basically, Procter & Gamble, the world's largest consumer goods company, they basically said, here is a portal, send us your idea. And if it meets certain criteria, we'll talk to you. So they realized about 10, 15 years ago, they don't have all that R&D, they've got ability to scale things, but they haven't got that know-how that now is that, you know, in the garage invention idea. So could this be a business model thing?
I think the business model change is interesting because there's a lot happening in that area. You know, in the US, venture capitalists and industrial design firms are partnering. So the old days of a brief and design fees and go on and do the work, in the US is changing quite a bit, so that the design firm becomes a stakeholder, they own the IP in conjunction with the client, they share the revenue stream. It's a fantastic business model for industrial design because you don't just share the revenue for the first 3 weeks while you're working on the concept, you own part of the IP, it's an ongoing thing, and it's where sort of we need to go. And it's also good because as the business model changes in, let's say, for manufacturers or for any organisation that produces a service, they're also cash strapped. They're pushing their resources to the limit, and they're also saying it'd be great for us if we didn't have to outlay such a lot of money at the start of the project when we don't know whether it's going to yield any return or not. So typically in Australia, that's been for the inventors, hasn't it? You know, you and I have dealt with inventors, and they come in and they've got no money, they've got some great ideas, and then they ask the designer to do it on a royalty. And then the designer has to say, can this guy ever pull it off? You know, should I engage in this? But when you've got venture capitalists, a much higher level, and you've got an organisation that can produce, you get a level of confidence about it, then the model changes. And it's certainly worthwhile the design company then partnering. And that gives, you know, from a designer's point of view, multiple revenue channels. So from the business model of the design firm, it's unbeatable, although you have to invest up front.
Well, it's Groucho Marx joke. I would never want to be a member of a club that have him as a member, which the clients who offer you royalty, you don't want a royalty from. The ones you want a royalty from, they're the ones that don't need one. But Sam.
I just want to add on to that point, because if you look at Procter & Gamble or firms like that with the open innovation systems, what they're offering is actually, you know, not ideas. I mean, I've never walked into a company that never had good ideas. But what they're actually offering is the value chain of those ideas. So how do you actually sell the experience? And I think this is where we're moving from a product economy down to this experiential economy. And those experiences go across many touch points. And really that's what you're designing. And a company who actually understands those touch points and can manage those touch points really well through the business model. And Procter & Gamble can do that when they actually see these opportunities. So if we look at the VC firms, they just don't give money, they give smart money. Because they give access to actually key channels that you can actually start to value add within. And I think this is where designs have to actually start to see this opportunity more than just a product or an idea, is actually see the whole holistic view of actually what is that business model.
The designers and the clients,
Yeah.
I believe.
Well, this partnership.
Indeed. I will change the slide over to the crowdsourcing model. If we can have a quick... Crowdsourcing, you've all heard of Kickstarter, I'm sure. Kickstarter, the crowdsourcing platform, which allows people to raise money, small amounts of money, from private individuals. It's totally unregulated, I understand, and it is democratizing, I believe is a strong word for it, funding and innovation, and it cuts out the middleman again. The reference to the MP3 player and the music industry is that the middlemen keep being eroded away, which is a good thing because the end consumer pays less for what they do. On the Kickstarter side of things, have any of you had any direct experience with that through clients? Because I've got a little one. We had one in Sydney, New South Wales, where we had a committee that wanted to raise $15,000, and they did it. Went to government, went here and there to private investors, couldn't get it. 250 people contributed between $5 and $150 each, and this thing got off the ground. I wonder what the VC industry is saying about it, because as we know, the VC industry in Australia is, can we call it underdeveloped? Silicon Valley has got this incredible venture capital community. Is this something we can tap into in this country?
Again, I mean, it's an extremely, and I was involved in the project you're talking about, and just seeing that the dollars click over, and I think what it does is, as well as raising funds, you've already got a captive audience, you've got a captive market who you can almost go to a VC and say, look, I've raised $1 million, and I've got 1,000 customers ready to buy the product. It's almost a done deal, So I think in terms of speeding up the product development process and having a more solid business case when you go to a VC, I think that is in that regard, it's going to have a very big impact. But we've all heard of the examples of Kickstarter, a company that developed a watch, and they raised $8 or $9 million. So it's phenomenal. I think it's going to have a very big impact on how products reach the market and the speed in which they reach the market as well.
I think that notion of that lead customer is really critical. And if you can actually, a VC really likes it. If you've already got, it's an order book filled, it makes sense that your product's out there. But again, the VCs, what they're looking for is still exits. What's the exit strategy? So you still have to design the whole offering. So it's not just about the idea. And we need to move beyond getting a product to market is one thing. But actually, what's the succession of that product? Actually, how do we value add that product? That's really where design comes in. So I think Kickstarter is a great way to get your product to launch. But then what is that next step that we need to start considering?
There are a lot of frustrated industrial designers out there who have great ideas, who knock on clients' doors, who knock on money doors, and are rebuffed. And that's where I think we're seeing Kickstarter come in its own, and a lot of these things are from designers for designers. And I had to laugh. There was a headline the other day about, 40% of Kickstarter projects don't raise financing. I thought, my God, 60% reach financing. That is incredible. You go out there to a VC, you'd be lucky to get, what's your percentage? 0.0 something of a percent? 1%, yeah. Any possibility? And it's free lead customer and lead generation, etc. So that's the finance side of the crowdsourcing model. In terms of IP crowdsourcing, and this is going back to what we spoke about earlier, when you've got all these contributors going to crowdsourcing, I'm thinking specifically of a website called Thingiverse, where people can download a 3D CAD model, they can change it, modify it, and re-upload it. And it's really basic stuff these days, but it's quite amusing because you see everyone's very kind, it's on the Creative Commons, and there's a attributed to, attributed to, attributed to. There's 4 screens long. And it's one of those things that really bugs me about intellectual property. But where is that going to end up in terms of your licensing models, etc., for those simple and non-medical products, for example?
It's getting more and more complex, the intellectual property thing. It's already a can of worms. If you go to a patent attorney, you come out sort of scratching your head going, I'm definitely in the wrong business. But the thing about that is you have to invest a lot of money to protect the idea, and then you don't. It's a waste of money anyway if you don't have the capital to defend it. So the whole IP thing is very complex. You've got multinational, different legislation in different countries, a lot to control. With crowdsurfing, the thing about it is the IP is still retained with the inventor. So the author of the intellectual property owns it. Main thing is to make sure that you follow proper process before you go public. That's the key to it. And then it's just the same as any other product development. If you go to a patent attorney before you go online and raise the capital, you own the IP, it's protected, and then you can do whatever you want. Everybody else gets a share of the products later on. They don't get a share of the IP. So that's it's still the same. Still works fine.
So it's still complicated, and the IP lawyers get very
The
very
IP
wealthy.
lawyers have a great future, don't they? Because all those inventors are going to go out there. They're empowered. They're likely to raise capital. So if they're savvy and the thing will work, then the lawyers will get rich.
What's new? But how can industrial designers, with the skill set we've got, how can we tap into this crowdsourcing and funding? And it's through the broadness of the web. How can we tap into that? How can we help our clients tap into that, for example? If there were things that you'd advise your clients to do, or they came to you with an idea, where would you steer them, Mark?
When they come to us with an idea and it's a good one, typically we put them through the government, R&D tax grants and try and help them where we can. We generally help them network with other parties that can get their project going, give them advice to try and kindle the project and get it going. But to give them money, we haven't been able to do it. So we can, if they comply with the government requirements, then they'll get a grant and then the project can get started. But generally, if they haven't got wherewithal, it'll stall. If they haven't got a rich uncle or something like that, we can't donate our services. If we haven't got an agreement in place for a share in the IP, then it does stall. So in that regard, it's a great opportunity, for everybody to have the opportunity to launch the idea that you've always had. So it's going to change the dynamics of product design quite a lot, isn't it?
Which comes back to that partnering approach again, because then you go in partnership with your clients and you both do the Kickstarter or equivalent thing together, I guess.
Yeah. I think it's going to be fascinating because if you think about all the ideas, because ideas are cheap. Everybody has ideas, thousands of them. And in the past, we've got an ideas book at Blue Sky, and there's thousands of ideas we've had over the years, and none of them ever see light of day, and some of them are pretty interesting. But I don't have the passion to follow it up and drive it through, because to do it, it takes such discipline and dedication to bring a product to fruition. So you just go, I won't worry about that. But now there's a possibility to say, okay, well, we can put a few people together that believe in it and see what happens.
I still think it's twofold. I mean, I think in the first case, the best thing about design is actually provoking your customers or your stakeholders with ideas. Don't be passive. I work with too many firms who keep their IP so close to their chest and spend so much on development and then finally launch it and realise that they've answered or addressed the wrong question. And we've all had clients like that. So this notion of crowdsourcing can really be used to test your market and fail fast again in that way. Maybe not under your brand, under a different brand, and it's again very strategic in the way they do this. But make use of these enablers or technology enablers. But I think the flip side is programs like Kickstarter and what have you are the cheapest market research to find out what's going out there. Watch what's being invested in. Look at the trends of actually where people are investing. That's going to give you a great insight into some of these latent needs, into some of these sectors. And if you can actually draw on that information, you've now got a great way of actually creating your own opportunities.
I think I completely agree with you, and we're talking to Plausible at the moment, trying to develop a strategic relationship with them in helping students get off the ground. So the student winners coming out of our awards program now have an avenue to actually commercialise their products. And I think one of the issues we've put our finger on is if a student gets it wrong. Let's say they developed a new widget and they believe that they need $50,000 to get it commercialised. But in reality, they need $500,000. All of a sudden, they've put the pitch out there, and they've got 1,000 people who've all committed money, but they realise they've got their whole equation wrong. So I think I'm hoping it's also going to put a lot more business focus on that end of designers saying we've got to make sure we get our numbers right. We've got to make sure we get the business model right. We've got to make sure we get we get all the proposals right before we go out into that market. So.
Is it an opportunity for industrial design, for example, to come in? So someone has an idea, they want to go Kickstarter, and that we give them the credibility and the backing, for example, to say it's not going to cost you $50,000, it's going to cost you $500,000. Because we've heard the horror stories Kickstarter where people don't get enough money, they can't deliver, and everyone gets really angry. So I mean that as a quick takeaway here, that could be quite a little line in your CV saying that it's the partnering thing again, isn't it? It's the strategic partnering with people.
The other thing that's worth mentioning is that as designers graduate from university, the typical path is to look for a company and apply, send your CV and hope you get an interview and then get a job. Well, maybe there's other paths now which are pretty interesting. And this one's a biggie because if you've got great ideas and you're a talented designer, others will believe in you and you don't have to follow that traditional path. You can come straight out of university, you've got great ideas, great work, you can get capital, you can start a company, you can start making things, and online you find the fellowship quite quickly, who your friends are, they follow you, you can keep understanding, like Sam was saying, you understand more about your end users, exactly what they want. And so I like that. I think it's a great way to say to future designers that you've got much more potential now to do your own thing than you ever have had. You know, in my world now, we started a little company to manufacture Dosh wallets, and I really find that very satisfying compared to working for some clients. Because, you know, clients, I need them, but gee, they're a pain in the neck. Sorry, everyone. But, you know, it's one of those things. I've met architects too that have said the same thing. Gee, wouldn't it be good if we could just get rid of our clients? Because they give you the brief, they control the purse strings, they direct the whole thing, and sometimes they make the wrong calls that you can't believe, and you still have to keep going because otherwise you won't get paid. Now this model's completely different, isn't it? You just say, what do I believe in? What's my passion? What's my skill? You design it, it goes up online, and if you're successful, you can keep going. And you don't have to eat humble pie when some person who you have less respect for is telling you what you should do with your design.
You've got to make the logo bigger.
Yeah, we've been there, haven't we?
Absolutely.
What is interesting, just coming back to your question about, you know, the crystal ball and looking 10, 15, 20 years from now, is that if you look at what has happened to the music industry, you know, where you essentially, you have an artist who puts their work up on iTunes and they can download that song for 99 cents. Potentially that might be what happens to the design industry, where, you know, you have a design, you upload it onto a site and people can actually download it and print it off into their 3D printer and they get, you know, $2.99, and that's a royalty-based system that potentially, you know, work as well. So I think it's a very exciting kind of 5-10 years as all this technology develops.
And we've started to see it happening with sites like Ponaco and Shapeways, and it is quite interesting dynamic. So what we're seeing here is to get out, to talk to people, to form partnerships, think of things strategically. So instead of sitting there tinkering for days and days on really beautiful new mousetraps, that we really do have to talk to people, which is reassuring because that's what designers do. Because we are into people, unlike engineers, if they're in the room. We love dealing.
And I think just on that point, I mean, when we do business models for companies, they often say, well, who's your customer and what's your value proposition? And it quickly becomes obvious that your customer is actually your partner. And so it shifts this dynamic. It's saying, actually, we don't need them to actually sell to. We actually need them to actually deliver. And this becomes a really, really critical part of actually who do you need to speak to. Again, and this is why I really encourage my clients or startups to say, don't keep your IP close to your chest. Because actually they're not just buying your IP, they're actually buying all your connections. They're buying this network with you. And that's really critical. So, and if you can get this mindset through in a business, you've got a much greater opportunity, you've got a far more robust and resilient business.
And another theme that seems to be coming out of here.
Yeah.
I'm getting the cutting off head signal. Thank you all. We're out of time for this particular part right now. We handed out questions, cards for you to put questions on. We will collect those now, please. If you've got any questions, for God's sakes, please put them out the front here. The panelists are here to answer them. This is going to be quick, sharp, and quite mildly amusing, I trust. So will us designers become redundant if 3D prototyping can be downloaded for free? E.g., you can download music for free.
Well, someone's got to do it. You know, you can download it, but someone's got to design it first. So the designer's always employed. Someone's created the IP, had the vision. So we're safe.
And are we likely to see Officeworks offering 3D printing?
Yes. Yeah, why not?
Yeah, why not?
So
I think Kinko's or FedEx Kinko's in the States are already offering that here and there, where you can take your file down and they build it for you to pick it up the next day. This is a tricky one. How do you balance a company's need for design integration with that company's need for financial conservatism in this current economy? Second part of the question, how do you help point these companies towards government support and grants? So maybe the first part is interesting. How do you balance the need for design integration and commercial reality?
Look, this is a constant challenge, especially with SMEs. Cash flow is everything in these firms. So what you try to do is actually give an innovation portfolio with these firms. So they do need their core business, where they are today. And what you try to do is actually transform them gradually into these new set of opportunities. That's not throwing everything out and actually saying 180 degrees. And for some businesses, I said earlier, it's actually about doing spin-outs of their own brand when it's too high risk for them, that their brand may be damaged. So it's this constant balancing. Again, this is what a good leader is in a CEO, is that constant balancing, who knows where the cash is, where the opportunities are, and how do you balance that?
I think it's also about positioning design as an investment and not a cost. You know, and I think that's very challenging. And you need, Mark, I think you told me many years ago, you sometimes have a client that comes in and you design one product and they kind of go, wow, can you do this for us as well? And before you know it, you're actually designing, a whole range for them. And so I think it's sort of, getting the foot in the door and actually demonstrating that design is actually this investment and it's going to return on the bottom line, rather than it being, as you said, a cost.
True, but design isn't expensive, but it is very expensive if you don't design, isn't it?
It's opportunity cost.
They'll either have a future or they won't. So it's very expensive if they don't.
That's always very hard to convince them to actually sign the check, even though they know that because they're signing the check today.
You've got to have that three-horizon thinking. So at the moment, most businesses work on the first horizon, don't they? What's going to feed them, what sales are going to be next month, next week, perhaps 1 year. But they need to have second horizon, 5 years out, and third horizon. Projects, thinking, research, and not all design strategies cost money. It's ways of partnering and engaging. We've seen some great examples tonight. So there are ways to keep lots of things off the books and still start embedding design thinking in the company.
When you're saying three horizons, can you expand on the second and third horizon? If the first one is purely, hand to mouth.
Well, the three horizon is the way to guarantee a sustainable business. That's what every CEO wants, because they're all, including me, worried about what happens at the end of this big project, or what happens when other competitors come into the market. So you want sustainability, and that's long-term business. And in order to have long-term business, you have to have a three-horizon strategy. So the third horizon is engaging with PhD professors at university level, looking at things that are way out there, that none of your competitors have even sniffed yet. And so have that work going. And the second horizon is further than what you're doing now, but beginning early form studies, jigs, tests, associations, collaborations, getting that stuff going. And then the first horizon is the stuff you're tooling now, ready for launch next year, or things that are in the pipe that you're working on. And that strategy consistently delivers a sustainable long-term business. With the design integration program, some of the SMEs have said, oh, look, it's a family business, it was my grandfather's, and now I've got it, and we're in difficult times. How am I ever going to keep it for the next generation? And this is how.
And I think it's just on that third horizon, if you compare us, our European colleagues to our Australian businesses, Australian businesses aren't good at actually engaging with universities to look at that third horizon. We always want to solve the known problem. And universities are slightly different to that. They actually want to look at the unknowns. And I've just come back from Europe recently working with some SMEs. And the models they work with to actually engage with their university partners to strategically look at just knowledge in their business is wonderful, because it actually makes them resilient. Because they're not wanting to see, oh, is there a product in this? Is there the next new thing? It's just knowledge in their business. Because they know they're going to be doing it, their competitors are doing this, and they're able to interpret it.
And one cute one closer to home. What advice, Mark, would you give to an intern starting at Blue Sky in October? But I think we framed that from the point of today's conversation, where the world is going strategically. What would you like to see in an intern in terms of their mindset and their readiness for the next 30, 40-year career?
Look, the only thing when I
Thank you,
ever
Ollie.
hire anybody, it's the thing that my old boss at Philips said to me once, and he said, look, I look the applicant in the eye and I see what make of a person they are. So that's the truth to it if you're hiring. So I look at the intern and I look at the work, but that's not so interesting to me. I look at the person first. Is the person dedicated? Is the person honest and true? Do I have a good rapport with them? Are they going to make a great team member? Then that's the person I say, right, stay.
No pressure.
How do you learn that at uni?
It's integrity. It's integrity, and it does come out in everything you do. If you have that integrity in your work, the quality of how you do things and you conduct yourself, it comes out. But, for the advice is you have to first get your toes under the table, don't you? To any employer to be able to have a rapport, to show who you are. But, you just have to, like I do, I've got the same, it's all the food chain, I'm trying to get new work off companies and they have to judge me the same way as I judge an intern. We're all in the food chain.
On that note, I do believe we are slowly hitting our time limit. That's not a pretty picture of the food chain, though. There were some pertinent questions here, but I think some of those were answered tonight. How would you go about crowdfunding? What do businesses look for? And I think we touched on that with the value of design, the opportunity cost of design, which is extremely important. It's a struggle we face every day as working designers, convincing people that what we do is actually really worthwhile and will make the money in the long term. And of course, they've forgotten about you by the time they've bought their island somewhere. Sadly. Is there any last? Do you want to make any sort of closing remarks, closing comments about the future of industrial design?
I'll have a go. I just back to your very first question about how Australia rates, and I think there was a general sigh in the audience about me saying that we generally don't rate very high. But one of the biggest challenges is measuring design, and we at ICSID, at the international level, we're trying to tackle this head on. How do you actually measure the return on design investment? And there's an interesting proposal on the table at the moment by the Korean Institute of Design Promotion. So they are a government organisation that spend a lot of money in promoting design in Korea, and it's evident in, you see some of the brands coming out of Korea, such as Samsung and Hyundai and Kia, etc. Essentially what they are proposing to do is to develop a global design index that will eventually allow countries to be able to measure how competitive they are by design. So, I wish I could look into a crystal ball and say that, Australia is ranking number 7 at the moment. But to truly answer your question, it is difficult to see how we are performing. But I think for me that project is a game changer. And you and I have spoken about this briefly, Oliver, in that, that if you can't measure anything, it's the age-old saying, you can't actually put a value on it. And I think it's the biggest challenge that designers have, is that they can't actually quantify in dollar terms what it is that they're able to offer. So I'm extremely excited about that project. I think it's going to be very challenging to develop the methodology behind a model like that, because you're actually talking about measuring one country against another country. But we have stock exchange indexes, we have innovation indexes now, and I think this is certainly something that, from a design perspective, will hopefully change the profession profoundly. So I'm looking forward to it.
Correlating that to GDP would be pretty interesting. Mark, any closing remarks?
I guess from my point of view, the thing about the future of industrial design is all about change. The profession's changing, and we've seen some discussion tonight about technologies that are changing the world that we work in. So I'm a big believer in, product design and industrial design generally being a change agent in the way we work. I'm very receptive to experience design. I don't care exactly what the outcome is, as long as it's a design solution. It uses process, it's analytical, it uses creativity, you come with a solution. To me, that's what industrial design's all about. And I don't particularly care if it's an object that you, like a chair, or an experience in a bank, or any other place like that. As long as it has those attributes that change human behaviour, improve our condition. So I like the idea of industrial design, and Australians at the forefront of this to morph the way we've always done things, because it never stays still. And the advocates of the pure industrial design thing, making a model, we have to see that there's so much change going on that the profession itself needs to morph and change and be adaptive and flexible, still have those fundamental qualities that make it what it is. So don't let those go, that creativity, that spark, you know. But that's where I see industrial design going.
And same with industrial design going into the boardroom in the future?
Oh, look, I'd encourage you all to be bold. I mean, I think we need to take a bit of our own medicine and actually practice what we're preaching. And if we're trying to challenge our companies to change, I think we need to actually look at it ourselves. Saying, how do we change as a profession to go with it? What is our new business model? You know, it's no longer the billable hours model. And we need to get beyond that. We need to go more into this relationship. There is a willing market out there, at least in the corporate world and the SMEs, to take on this notion of design integration, design-led thinking, design-led innovation. But it's up to us to disrupt it. We need to actually challenge ourselves and some of the assumptions that have gone over the last 30, 40 years. And I think some of the technologies we've seen here today, the crowdsourcing, the manufacturing 2.0, are just enablers for that. But ultimately, as a profession, we actually hold our own destiny about where we want to take it.
That's a wonderful message to finish up on. We've officially run out of time, and I hate to call it a night, just as we're starting to warm up here.